All right, 2 Kings chapter 25, let's call this one another prison and subtitle it recidivism, the term that can describe the way in which it can be difficult to stay out of prison once you've been let go. And that's literally what is happening in this chapter through three stories, the first of which is going to be the continuation of the story of King Zedekiah that we mentioned back in chapter 24. See, what happened is, as we mentioned, he is going to try to sneak out of Jerusalem instead of turning himself into the Babylonians. And in sneaking out, he is going to get caught up. And they are, as Jeremiah prophesied, they are not going to treat him well at all. And instead of simply carrying him off with his family intact, as we saw happen with Jehoiachin, they are going to kill his sons in front of him. And that's going to be the last thing that he sees as they put his eyes out after executing his sons in his presence. And so they are then going to ship him off to Babylon, but they are going to leave a remnant. And even though it might have been hard for the poor to catch a break under the reign of some of these last kings of Judah, the kings of Babylon are going to leave some of the poorest people of the land to tend the land as they cart the remaining captives who haven't escaped off to Babylon. But we are going to see that the poor in the land are not going to be the only ones, as some of the soldiers have actually escaped as well. And that's going to become important because even though this remnant is going to be left with a governor that the Babylonians are going to set up to help take care of them and allow them to manage the territory, the sad thing is we are going to see this remnant self-destruct, even though they've been promised. If they maintain the land well, it will go well with them. Some of them are quite possibly going to look at the challenge of trying to carve out a life in the remnant of what Judah once was, now that Babylon has invaded and torn down much of the city of Jerusalem. And they're going to look at two other kingdoms as a better option. One is going to be the Ammonite kingdom, and another is going to be their old friend, Egypt. First and foremost, a man by the name of Ishmael, who seems to be from one of the royal families, is going to come back once the Babylonians have set up a new governor and things actually start to go well. It's going to be attractive to those who had been in hiding. But among them, as we said, Ishmael is going to come in, and the new governor is going to get a warning that Ishmael is not here to help us rebuild. He has actually struck a deal with the Ammonites to kill the new governor of the territory, and eventually that is exactly what he is going to do. And so even though we don't have a clear statement of Ishmael's motives, he has struck a deal with the Ammonites to undermine the remnant's ability to at least begin bringing some stability back to Judah. But some of the soldiers who have escaped heard what Ishmael did. They're going to save a good number of the captives he was trying to deliver over to the Ammonites, which is good news for now. But they are going to likewise self-destruct, because even though Jeremiah is still among them, and they are going to ask him to give us the news from God, whatever it is, how we should move forward, they probably should have likewise asked for the courage to follow the advice. Because after 10 days, when Jeremiah actually brings back a word from God that they should simply stay put, they're going to find Egypt to be a better option. And even though the chapter may not specifically tell us what fueled the remnant's fears, stands to reason that Ishmael found it a lot easier to strike a deal with Ammon than to try to carve out a life in what was left of Judah. Likewise, the remnant probably looked at Egypt, still relatively prosperous at the time, as a much better option, if not an easier option, than trying to carve out a life in what was left of Judah. And it reminded me of a warning that we'll eventually see, a very famous warning from Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount, when he said, "Enter by the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the way is easy that leads to destruction, and those who enter by it are many. For the gate is narrow and the way is hard that leads to life, and those who find it are few." Understanding that when the remnant ends up going to Egypt, Egypt is actually going to be conquered by Babylon next. And so all of the hardship they were trying to flee in Judah is actually eventually going to find them in Egypt. And so what the remnant seems to have been faced with was the more difficult looking task of trying to rebuild in Judah, reminding me of the old saying that goes, "Work smarter, not harder," which has a level of wisdom in it. But to the degree that working smarter, not harder, becomes a justification for simply doing what seems easier, it can be dangerous. Understanding that downrange, what they did not consider is God had basically said you're only going to be in captivity for 70 years. And so to the degree that they abandoned Judah, God promised that you're going to have to come back. And so understand that truly working smarter means counting the cost of taking what seems to be an easier route. Understanding that what seemed to be working smarter for the remnant of Judah meant that some of them would never get to go back home. And those who did get to go home would go home to a property that was 70 years more run down than it would have been if they simply would have stayed put, even though staying put in the short run might have involved working harder.